considering your history, I think maybe we should talk about what we were discussing before we hit record, is the fact that you helped launch the Dartmouth Review back when you were in college in 1982 or 1980.
Yeah,
You graduated in
1980,
82.
graduated in 82, right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I started, me and a small group of people, and some names you might have heard of were part of this effort. Laura Ingraham, she's the
Mm-hmm.
host on Fox News. She was part of this. She was like 4 or 5 years younger than me. We started this paper, a conservative right of center, I would say conservative libertarian, or just people interested in freedom. We started this paper, which was kind of a right of center National Lampoon. There was a lot of humor in it. Like half the paper was kind of humor, and the other parts were investigative reporting about what was happening on campus. And one of my roles, I was the president and publisher of the paper, and there were 5 others, I think, that were co-founders. I wanted the paper to be only about Dartmouth, what was happening on the Dartmouth campus, because nobody cares about what a 20-year-old thinks about world events. But we were reporting on what was going on campus, and we were able to get a hold of the alumni mailing list. Well, first we applied for funding, to be subsidized by the college, and they turned us down, even though they're subsidizing every other group, but just not us. And so we got a hold of the alumni directory, and we key punched it in, had it key punched into a computer database. And of course, computers back then were very primitive, but we got it in, and we did a mailing out to 45,000 Dartmouth alumni, and asking for support for the paper. And I think $100,000 came in, which is a lot of money. I'd never seen that much money before in my life. So, and that really launched the paper, and we were able to buy offices, and we'd put out a few issues by then. And the college really reacted negatively. They really tried to crack down on the paper, tried to put the paper out of business. They threatened us with lawsuits, and we were in court. And they tried to they used the campus police to prevent distribution of the paper on the campus. And of course, that actually just made the paper a lot more popular. People wanted to get their hands on it. It's like, didn't get my issue of the paper because the police picked it up, the campus police. We'd go around to each the door of each dorm room, and we slide the paper under it. We also left the paper at local stores that supported us. And the paper was also supported by advertising. We went around to the stores and asked for advertising, and the ones that liked us would advertise. And they would also stack up the paper, like at the Dartmouth bookstore. The Dartmouth bookstore was run by a conservative entrepreneur type, and he loved the Dartmouth Review, and he always advertised. And he always had the paper stacked up there at the Dartmouth bookstore. So we were definitely able to get the paper out. The paper was the first student conservative paper or I'd say the most successful, and the first. It's still publishing today, by the way. It's still publishing, 40 years later. And so it just became kind of I think maybe 150 other papers, conservative or right-leaning, freedom-leaning papers, sprang up on campuses kind of in the wake of the Dartmouth Review. And so it really became a phenomenon. Like 60 Minutes did a piece on us, which actually was surprisingly positive. I think they came in, trying to present us as a bunch of racists or something like that. But once they got talking to us, they saw, hey, that was pretty cool. And it was a pretty that was actually a pretty balanced piece on 60 Minutes. And it was just a media kind of sensation back then. And I then wrote a book called Poisoned Ivy my senior year at Dartmouth, just on this totalitarian mindset that was developing on the liberal side. Liberals used to be for freedom. You had the free speech movement at the Berkeley campus during the Vietnam War protests, against the draft. So they were for free speech. The ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union, for civil liberties, for free speech. So in the 60s and the 70s, early 70s, the liberals, the left side, was all about freedom, all about civil liberties. But what I point out in my book in Poison Ivy is that when they actually get in charge of something, they aren't for freedom anymore. They don't want to have conservative speakers on the campus or freedom-oriented speakers on the campus. They'll shout you down. And you've seen that, of course. And it's of course intensified a lot more now. At Dartmouth, the student body was pretty conservative. We did a poll of students back then, and I think 60% were for Reagan. Of course, the college professors were very much on the left. The college professors, they had a faculty meeting, and they voted, I think it was 190 to 5, to condemn the election of Ronald Reagan. So there was that. But the book points out that really the origins of this totalitarian mindset is this, what I call victims studies departments that were rising up on the campuses, particularly the Ivy League campuses at that time, or the elite colleges, like women's studies, Black studies, Native American studies, gay and lesbian studies, and all these groups. And at that time, these departments were very small, maybe a few professors, but they were very vocal, and they would be involved in organizing these protests and so forth. And so I noticed that this group, they would get professors fired for saying the wrong thing. If you had the wrong views, you could not be a woman and not be a feminist and get a job in the women's studies department. Margaret Thatcher would not be respected by the women's studies department, even though she was a just tremendously influential and tremendous leader, a tremendous woman, female leader. They should be proud of that. But so I noticed that it's not women's studies, it's just left-wing studies. It's just left-wing indoctrination. And same with all these other, what I would call victim studies departments. And of course, as time went on, they became more and more powerful, and we see how powerful they are today. These giant corporations, Fortune 500 corporations, in response to this, have had to set up entire departments, divisions that do nothing but, enforce this, what is it, diversity, equity, and inclusion, this kind of woke ideology. And so, that's what's happening. And of course, Google and these big tech companies, Google, Microsoft, and so forth, their biggest customers, the government. Google was basically launched by the CIA. Yeah, it was launched on its own with venture capital and so forth, but the CIA was the biggest customer of Google and is the biggest customer of Microsoft and Amazon. And so really what you have emerging now is this big tech partnership with big government, and they want to put a lid on free speech. And that's why they hate Elon Musk so much, because what Elon Musk did was, with his purchase of Twitter, now X, for $44 billion, he put his money where his mouth was. He really believes in freedom. And he provided a rather large, a very large platform where free speech is actually allowed. And that's why they're coming after him so hard. With Biden administration, I think, has 8 investigations of Elon Musk underway now, some of them criminal investigations, and almost all of these started as a result of his purchase of Twitter, because they cannot let the truth out. If you let the truth out, they're kind of done. And my book really is the first book to talk about this woke mind virus, which is the totalitarian mindset on the left. They're no longer for freedom. I called it the ethos. That's what I called it the ethos. I didn't call it woke. That wasn't a term that existed, but I developed this term, the ethos, because it's not just about your political views. It's not just about who you vote for, whether you're for Biden or you're for Trump or you're for RFK Jr. or somebody else. It's not about your political affiliation. So that's, of course, part of it. You have to think exactly right, and if you make even a slight slip up, you use the wrong word. Is it supposed to be black people? Is it supposed to be African American people? Is it supposed to be people of color? And of course, these terms change all the time. So if you use an outmoded term, you're a racist or something like that. And so they really enforce these speech codes, and it's really Orwellian, because when you control the language and when you enforce speech codes, what you're really doing is brainwashing people, because that has an impact on your thinking. How you speak impacts how you think, because when you speak, it's really just an expression of what you're thinking. And if they can just control speech with these speech codes, then they can really shape the country, because most people, they don't really think for themselves. They're not critical thinkers. They kind of just believe what the government says, or they just believe what CNN says. And and by the way, a great follow, Marty, is a guy named Mike Benz, and he talks about how these big media companies are basically CIA operations. And I didn't fully appreciate this until I started following Benz. I mean, I kind of suspected it. But that's been going on since, the 1950s, or really coming out of World War II, when the CIA, the intelligence agencies, a big part of what the intelligence does is control narratives. And, they're doing this as offensive weapons against our military enemies, whether it was Hitler in that time, or communism and so forth. So in some ways it was good. We kind of liked it back then, that the CIA was destabilizing regimes that we didn't like with propaganda and by controlling the narrative. But back then there were only really 3 major TV networks: CBS, ABC, NBC. And so they could really dictate what people were thinking. And of course, during World War II, the media was very patriotic, right? So we don't mind that. Great, patriotism. But then what's happened recently, and Mike Benz really chronicles this tremendously, is they've turned the intelligence agencies against us, against the American people, and they're trying to tamp down any kind of alternative viewpoint. And they are, if there's a reason why the talking points on the major media networks are all identical. I mean, every day it's like just a set of talking points. It's just they just repeat the same talking points. There's no original thought, and that is the propaganda that's coming directly from the intelligence agencies. I mean, it's not only the intelligence agencies, but it's being controlled largely by that, and of course, it's filtered through the political parties and so forth. So that's what's happening. And Bitcoin, and I say that Bitcoin is really one of the off ramps from that, because whoever controls your money controls you. So Bitcoin is an escape from that. Bitcoin is not governed or controlled by humans. Humans are prone to corruption and they want power. And so Bitcoin is your off ramp from that. And, I'm not all the way like Max Kaiser, who thinks that Bitcoin is going to, just collapse government, collapse the need for government. And, everything's going to be all fiat currency is going to be sucked into Bitcoin. I don't think that. I don't really want that to happen. I want the United States to still exist. I want to have a secure border. I want to have an honest money. Now, I think, fiat currency is fine for buying your cup of coffee, your groceries, and people will probably still continue to do that. But Bitcoin allows people to vote with their feet. Some people have called it digital gold. So if all hell breaks loose here and we become a totalitarian dictatorship, you can carry your wealth in your pocket and go somewhere else. You can vote with your feet. And so that's what Bitcoin does. And I think, the other pillar of the hope for freedom's survival is Elon Musk, because he's the richest man in the world and he now gets it. He voted Democrat all of his life, and then he kind of woke up and saw that hey, wait a minute, these people are not for freedom at all. These people are for totalitarianism, a high-tech kind of feudalistic totalitarianism, push-button totalitarianism. I think that Edward Snowden, I think, coined that phrase, or turnkey totalitarianism, and that's what big tech is. They can disappear you with a push of a button in terms of social media and your internet presence. So Bitcoin pushes back against that, but Elon, with his purchase of X, also pushes back against that. And so I feel like I have a lot of hope, because I didn't have much hope really before Elon purchased Twitter and turned it into X. Because Bitcoin is cool. You do need a sound money, and if government controls your money, they can control you. And of course, they're coming out with programmable money, right? CBDCs, central bank digital currencies. China's rolling this out in China, where they can turn off your money, or they can program your money so that you can only buy certain things, can't buy other things. They could turn off your money if they don't like what you're saying. So Bitcoin is the safeguard from that. I call it the Second Amendment for your money.
Yeah, it's extremely powerful and potent.
Yeah.
And I completely agree. Mike Benz, what he's done to eliminate what's going on behind the scenes of the censorship industrial complex is incredible. We had him on the show, I think, 3 months ago.